You give me data, I give you art. It's a rather facetious statement, but I'm rather a facetious speaker in the middle of PyData, so just roll with it for now. Firstly, I apologise for my strangely odd appearance. I fell off my bike 2 weeks ago in Brighton and smashed my head along the asphalt and was knocked out for half an hour, which has broken my brain and my eyeballs a little bit. So just bear with me if I get a bit random during this talk. I'm an artist who works in a number of different media. Painting here, this is from a series called Corporate Fight Club about businessmen fighting. Make installation digital art, and various other things that kind of bridge the digital and physical world. And I'm going to talk to you about 4 of those today. Firstly, for the record, I am an ex-geek. I'm a survivor of the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early noughties when the whole world looked like this. I also have a PhD in cognitive psychology back in the dim distant past. And I was also briefly very famous in America for about a year. That's me and Hugh Hefner. But today we're going to talk about materials. So let's start with what a material means to an artist. Here's a cave painting. Our hominid forebears would find a nice red-coloured rock that stimulated their visual field. They'd grind it up. They'd make it into a pigment. Through the process of art, they would make marks on the wall. This is the dawn of art, and this is what art feels like for most people. They pick up a paintbrush, or they manipulate physical objects and make a sculpture. These days, it's not really like that. Art can be a lot of other things. And one of the materials that I'm interested in working with is data, which is why I'm at the PyData conference. The task of the artist is to take the material and transform it, and that's what artistic practice is. So I'm going to talk about 4 things that deal with data. So this is my first bold statement of the day. When we're talking about the algorithmic universe, I'm talking about basically the stuff that involves computers and people, where data is created, destroyed, manipulated, reinterpreted, and presented to people. That's the algorithmic universe. And data is the stuff that it's made of, or it's an important material in there. I think the interesting bit is where the humans meet the algorithms, or where the humans meet the data. But using algorithms to process your material is not new. This is the work of William Latham, some of you may have heard of. He went on to produce very complicated digital 3-dimensional objects in the early 90s. Big fan of Brian Eno and all that sort of scene. But what we see here is he's got a rule or an algorithm which he's using to develop his art. So if we look at this one here, he's starting with a nice little cone-like triangle and evolving out along these paths into more complex forms. And that was the kind of the beginning of his practice as an artist. What I find interesting, and why we've got a commonality with PyData, is what he's done here is evolved out his forms till they reach a certain degree of complexity, where they're kind of visually exciting and interesting. Whereas most of the big data stuff that you guys are into is taking data that humans can't comprehend and bring them down to forms that humans can understand. So there's a commonality here. There's a kind of pleasingness about how you've summarized your data or where you've taken your practice. It's a kind of a sweet spot for humans. And I think that's kind of where I'm talking about algorithmic art. It's kind of where it's all about. It's like, what can you make that humans like? Let me see what I'm missing. There we go. Right. This is my meta slide, because we're going to talk about big data. Big data is data that humans find too big to handle. Right? So they get very excited about it, I assume because it's big and it's beyond their heads. It's not a term I have much love for, I must say, big data. I think it covers a multitude of sins. But it covers the kind of stuff that I'm dealing with, which is this relationship between the raw data, the machines that make it, the algorithms that we write to process it, and the humans who then consume the outputs of this processing technique. It's kind of like an artistic practice. So, you know, give yourselves a slap on the back for being artists. Yeah, so for shorthand, we're going to call this stuff data. And we're not going to worry about whether it's big or small. And I'm going to tease apart what I mean by data and how it can be different stuff in a second. So the 4 projects I'm talking about are based on the big data that people are giving away, mainly because they want artists and geeks to do the work for free. But that's my cynical view. I'm going to look at redacted data, where people publish data and then change their minds. I'm going to look at my data, the stuff that I spit out on social media randomly over time, and our data in terms of the nature of surveillance and what it is, how it feels that your data is starting getting trawled and analysed by machines and systems that we don't necessarily have control or understanding of. So let's start with number 1. The Tate gallery here in London very kindly released data on all 70,000 artworks in their collection. It's got the usual stuff: who painted it, what it's made out of, how big it is, who bought it, when they acquired it. But it's also got a bunch of interesting data that can only have been created by humans. The example here would be this one. There's a tag called emotions and human qualities applied to all the artwork. And it's got things like this in it, right? So this artwork contains shock and complacency and frustration. These are very interesting data points for an artist because they're human, right? This is human stuff. This is not a log file that's come out of a file server somewhere. A human's actually had to look at this piece of artwork and tag it in this way. And when I chatted to them about it after this project, they told me that this is down to humans actually sitting down and looking at every single artwork and classifying it and showing it to someone else and making sure they all agree and then producing this metadata around the artworks. So it's brilliant. It's unlike any other kind of big data that I've seen. Mostly it's big, there's lots of it, go do something nice. Whereas this is created by humans, so it's got an interesting features to it. Here's a couple of the categories drilling down. So yeah, universal concepts include power and evolution and good and evil and futility. There's a mythological cluster here about whether, which kind of mythological entities they are, and they're related to the personifications and that kind of thing. So there's really interesting stuff around each of these artworks. But the data itself is cast about the artwork. So you say, here's your painting, it was created by X, here are its tags. So the first thing I did was turn that on its head and use that data as a way of navigating their collection. So you can go in and say, look, find me anything that features a dustbin lid, is this example, because that's a feature that's in the domestic space of interiors. And lo and behold, there's stuff in the collection that's to do with dustbin lids. And this is true all over the shop. And it's interesting because it's a different way of coming across the art. Normally, if you go to the Tate, you wander around and there's a series of paintings that have been chosen, a small subset of the 70,000 artworks that they have. And you see them in the order they're presented to you, or you look at the big one first because you can't see very well. Whereas this way, you can actually get to all this data from a different way. It's literally a different way of slicing it up. And while doing this, the insight that I had is that these descriptors are descriptors of data points in the data space, 70,000 of them. But in fact, they describe the world of art to Tate. Right? As far as the people of the Tate are concerned, this is enough for me to classify everything we have. And what you've got is lots and lots of tags, lots and lots of potential. Certain items tick off certain tags, but some of them don't. And it reminded me of this guy, Alan Moore, who has the idea of idea space. And that as a creative thinker, what you're doing is stepping out into idea space and finding it like a discoverer, like someone on a seafaring yacht who discovers a new land. Oh, it's here, it's mine, I've defined it, I've created it. And that's what he's talking about when he talks about idea space. And so what we've got in this Tate data is an enormous idea space. There's a whole bunch of ways of describing things that have fallen out of this process of describing the artworks that they had. So I built a machine that does that. Here's an example. So this is a description of a non-existent artwork. created from the way the Tate describes other artworks. You've got the materials it's made out of, there's aesthetic qualities, subject matter, symbolism. And what you can do is create these kind of complex and pleasing descriptions of artworks. As an artist, that's really exciting. It's like, oh, I'd really like to see something made out of marble, dolomite, stone, and vehicle doors. That's already an exciting thing. And look, it's got a symbolic moon of the Virgin Mary, and a snowdrop of consolation, and a hair of emotion. Right? Surely that is a work of art that I'd love to see. And because of the wonders of the computational explosion, there are 88 nonillion of them. So there are 88 nonillion possible artworks based on the structure of the Tate data. That's already a fascinating thing. They gave me 70,000 artworks. I gave them 88 nonillion back. You know, what more could they ask for? It also produced my favorite ever comment, which was this one on Boing Boing, which is every living human got busy dashing off one of these artworks an hour. We would be done in only 2 by 10 to the power 18 years. Unfortunately, if the works averaged a kilogram, they would not only produce a crushing force of gravity, but would actually begin fusion before they were done. This is a difficult project. That would, can't really argue with that. Right, so that's public data that was given away specifically with this purpose. And it was interesting going to meet the Tate afterwards, because I was one of the first people to do anything with it. And they were like, brilliant! You did something with our data. It took us years to make that data, and we really wanted someone to do something with it. And they're very excited that people look at it in a new way. Right? And I think that's a lot of the story about big data and handing it out to artists and other developers is, please do something with this. I'm sure there's something in there, but we run out of ideas. Can you do it? And can you do it for nothing, please? So, anyway, that's that big data. Now we're going to look at redacted data. This is a phrase that everyone's familiar with, and it forced me to go and find out who actually spat it out. And apparently it was Stuart Brand in the 1960s, who was the actual founder of the Whole Earth catalogue. So if you know your geek history, that's like the original internet in book form. And the problem it gets to is that information, once you've published it in a digital form, doesn't want to be deleted. It's really, really hard to get rid of your data once you've put it out there. In fact, it's a kind of known problem in data science. It's like, don't publish it until you're really sure. Which leads me to this guy. Right? As you may have heard at the end of last year, the Conservative Party deleted all of David Cameron's speeches. In fact, they deleted all of the Conservative Party speeches prior to that year. So what was previously said by our current Prime Minister about what he was going to do and how he was going to make everything better for us conveniently disappeared off the internet. And to the point where they edited the robots.txt and say, look, don't even look here anymore. This is like somebody else's problem field built into it. Now, whether this is kind of intentional revisionism, because they're evil and want to change the world, or whether it was just some housekeeping bug with the website, we don't really know. But the fact was, they deleted them, and there was a big stink about it. Now, thanks to archive.org, there's historical snapshots of the Conservative website, and so actually it's relatively easy to go and find them if you want to find them. So I hoovered them all up and had a look and see what he'd said. And this is the first result of it. I thought, well, what did he promise? What did they promise that they actually did or didn't deliver on? And this is just a simple, like, find me every sentence that starts with "we will" and order them for me. Give me the first bunch. And it's actually a beautiful piece of poetry when you look at it. We will continue our ruthless pursuit of tax evasion. Yeah, they did that. We will reform the NHS. They also did that. Right? So some of it's true. But what came about was this feeling of kind of terrifying beauty, that by looking at these words that normally I wouldn't give a crap about Conservative Party speeches, but actually looking at them in this way, there's something quite fascinating about the structure and the form of writing a political speech. It's much more like poetry than it is about fact-giving. The better you say it, the more compelling the way you describe the world, the more believable you are. It doesn't really matter if you're telling a pack of lies or whatever. So I built a machine that writes poetry based on the speeches of David Cameron. I called it Algo Cameron, and it's still running now. And I didn't even do the calculation on this one, but I imagine it's equally billions and billions of possibilities that it creates. And I guess, I mean, aside from just being a bit of a dick, it's fascinating that you know, proving that point, that if you publish something and you publish it digitally, it's never going to go away. Right? There's no way that you can expect to change your mind about that decision. And I think that has an important effect on anyone who's publishing data. You know, it may be sitting on a server that you only know the IP address of, but is public because you haven't got around to locking it down. Expect it to be found. Expect it to be copied. Expect it to be crawled. Expect it to be indexed. Don't ever think that your data is safe. And this is actually known as the Streisand effect, named after Barbra Streisand, who in 2003 tried to suppress the publication of photos of her mansion. So someone had got in, taken pictures of her Malibu beach house, tried to get them in the press. She went, "Oh, that's terrible, it's an invasion of my privacy. Whatever you do, don't do that." And lo and behold, it was a huge story, right? It's known as the Streisand effect. That's exactly what Cameron has done. By quietly trying to sweep his data under the carpet, he only draw attention to it, right? So bear that in mind. If you publish and be damned, or publish and don't be damned, I guess. All right, the third project. This is based on my data. Shard Echo is a Twitter bot based on me. Recently, Twitter allowed you to download the history of your activities on their social network, and they give you a nice, big, fat CSV file, I think, of everything that you said. And my feeling about social data is, on the one hand, it feels very ephemeral, that you can write something, a status update, and forget about it. But it's not. Just see Cameron's point earlier. Once you've written it and you've put it public, it's there somewhere, and it's a problem that I discuss with my teenage daughter. It's like, you're 14. What you write now is still going to be available when you're 28 or when you're 58. You know, it's not going to go away. So I kind of wanted to look at that. What does this data tell the world about me? What is in there? You know, however witty I think I'm being in my 140 characters, I'm bleeding out something about my personality. So the first thing is this kind of just gross chart. I had to have a chart. It's PyData. It's a chart of how I tweet, right? Based on the 3 years of tweets I pulled out. I'm quite busy on Fridays, mid-morning, because I can't be asked to do any work, so I send more tweets. So that already is a kind of insight into the way I'm behaving with social media. And in fact, people are horribly predictable. There was a study in 2010 based on phone location data that found your location in an hour's time is predictable with a 93% accuracy, based solely on your mobile phone data and the fact that people behave the same way all the time. So 93% of the time, I can guess where you're going to be without even knowing anything about you. So Shard Echo is a bit like me. It's based on my tweets. But what I did is went in and used, actually this is Python, so it's fine. I used some Python to extract the adjectives and nouns that I'd used and create a dictionary of things that I talk about and the way in which I talk about them. And then it relives my life. So at the same time, on the same day, 3 years later, it finds that tweet that I sent out. It takes it and says, okay, if I throw out the adjectives and I throw out the nouns and pick some random ones and put them back in, then I'm going to make a more or less linguistically valid tweet. Most of it's nonsense, but you know, occasionally it comes out with real gold, and it's a kind of it's a fascinating way of looking at yourself, right? It can only ever say what I've said using words that I've said. It's not like a dictionary of everything. It's only my words, only the words that I've chosen to put out on Twitter. And it does it. So I've got 3 years of my life on Twitter recorded, which means it actually tweets 3 times as often as me. So at this point in time, whatever it is, 5 to 3, on the 22nd of February last year, if I'd sent a tweet, well, now Shard Echo is going to do it. It's going to do it again. So there's the kind of, the time course of my social media is still there, but the actual content is, you know, interestingly messed with. One of the things it does is it will answer you as well. So it's not quite just a dumb robot. If you talk to it, send it an app message, it will scan for keywords and see if I've responded to anyone else in the past using those keywords. And then it will go through this process again and take my response to someone else and rewrite it. So it's more or less talking about what you're talking about. I mean, it's obviously a bit crappy. It's like being impersonated by someone with a neurodegenerative disease, basically. But it touches on something quite interesting, because this notion of a distributed self or a kind of AI entity that's human-like is something that's quite popular. You know, my phone has Siri on it, right? I can talk to that and it will talk to me. I'm kind of happy with that interaction. I don't use it very much. However, if that robot really sounded like me, because it watched everything I said, then I could get it to do tasks for me. Right? So when my mum emails me and says, the internet's gone down, how do I fix the... I could get my little robot to answer that question for me. Like, that's brilliant, right? But already that's much more useful than Siri. And I'm comfortable with that. But then what if I got that robot and said, look, will you break up with my girlfriend for me? And then when I did that, that feels like qualitatively different, right? That feels like the sort of thing you wouldn't want a machine to do. But if you spent, 90% of your time fobbing off your mum's emails to a machine, maybe you'd also fob off your relationships. I don't know. So yeah, this notion of what it is that is essentially about you and getting a machine to try and imitate it is something that's in the post for all of us, right? It's going to happen. It's not just going to be the series of this world that you talk to. It's going to be a version of yourself is the most compelling one. So, it's worth having a look at that. So I guess the point of this is mined entirely on what I've publicly said. So this is the bit that I've consciously given out to the world. And I'm kind of aware of my deal with Twitter when I do that. When I post it, it goes on their server forever, and someone can search it. I've never met. It's going to be there. I kind of get that, right? Which leads me to this fourth quadrant of data, which is the kind of data that we're bleeding out, that we don't really think about. Now, I've classed them into benign and malignant. People will disagree very strongly about my definitions of what's benign and malignant, but bear with me for a moment. There's the kind of stuff that Amazon's doing. You like X, so you'll probably like Y. Or Facebook, you're talking about buying a new dress, you're probably single. Right? Or Google, which is just scanning everything that we do, absolutely in every possible permutation, just so maybe it can sell us a few more pairs of flip-flops or something. But it doesn't feel that bad. It's doing it. We don't mind. I kind of see how it works. The algorithm is somewhat transparent to me. And then we got the malignant ones, right? The ones that we don't like Prism and Tempora. Or, GCHQ putting devices right here, right, into the transatlantic pipe, watching our data go in and out of the country. Or whatever, it's some 10 petabytes a second or something, some incredible figure. Which, thanks to Edward Snowden, we know about now. But for most people, it feels a bit uncomfortable. People don't like being watched. My favorite question on this subject, or quote on this subject is, if you don't worry about privacy, why do you have curtains in your house? Just think about that for a second. Anyway, the implications of this system is much bigger. If Amazon recommends me a bad product, I'm not going to buy it. If Prism decides I'm a terrorist, it's going to affect my rights. They might lock me up, they might stop me from traveling, they may monitor me more, yada, yada, yada. But I don't know anything about that. But I actually feel that they're kind of the same kind of stuff. We're just looking at it in different ways. So when this occurred, I found myself running a digital art show, and being somewhat contrary, I put a painting in a digital art show. So this is William Hague checking your emails outside MI6 on his smartphone. He's surrounded by 7 magpies, because they're the sort of people that steal shiny objects like your data. 7 magpies from the kids' rhyme, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for guilt, 7 for a secret never to be told. The interesting thing about this particular painting, aside from its subject matter and the looming black clouds, is it's got a Raspberry Pi built in it. which looks at you through his left eye. So anyone who actually looks at this painting gets recorded. It's running some Python face recognition stuff that I downloaded. And once it's when it's kind of grabbed your face, it then transmits it to a digital nest that it's built elsewhere with a little Pepper's Ghost. So you can see yourself being sent out of this machine. And I think part of what's fascinating about it is looking at a painting is one of the most intimate things you do. It's just you and a work of art, and looking at it and trying to decide how that makes you feel, what it represents, all that kind of stuff. You feel like you're totally alone. It's like, oh, this is just me and this piece of art. So actually going in there and stealing someone's impression, I felt was a pretty good metaphor for what's going on. So I've got a little clip here. Oh, I don't know if you can hear it. I'm probably not going to say much. But you can see what it's,
if you are a law-abiding citizen,
how it works.
Going about your business and your personal life, you have nothing to fear.
So it then gets transmitted over to this nest here, which has got a Pepper's Ghost inside it. So you can see yourself in a couple of seconds actually being stolen by the painting. And the key point, I guess, is this is exactly like the data sharing relationship that the NSA have with GCHQ. So it means the NSA aren't allowed to look at American citizens. And GCHQ aren't allowed to look at UK citizens. But they have a data sharing agreement, which means, oh, I can call up the NSA and find out about UK citizens and vice versa. So it's total bullshit, right? Anyway, we could talk about that one later. My conclusions, I'm going to be quick, so I'm running out of time. I've shown you 4 different projects here relating to humans and this algorithmic universe and with data, because this is a conference about data. And so what is our relationship to big data, the big machines that are computing all this stuff for us? I guess the message I'm trying to get across is that being a data manipulator is a moral position. You can't be agnostic about it. Because what happens is you take a lot of data that only a machine can handle, and you summarize it in either a nice pretty graph or some headline numbers, or whatever it is. You're compressing it down, and you'll make those compression, that algorithm is making a decision, a kind of a moral decision. How this number ends up has ramifications. You know, we can look at the Gaussian coupler equation used across the board in high finance in the mid-2000s that was used to compile the risk on a basket of products, to create a derivative product. And this equation was great because it gives you one number about, oh, this thing has got a 54% risk. All right, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to sell it to him, I'm going to sell it to him, I'm going to sell it to him. And there was a caveat in this equation, which is this all works so long as the underlying price goes up. But everyone ignored that. Everyone, oh, there's a brilliant summary. This thing summarizes and simplifies the world for me. I'm going to use it. So I guess my take-home point is never underestimate the stupidity of your audience. So you have a moral responsibility when you're manipulating data, because someone, a pointy-headed boss, is going to look at it and make decisions that perhaps not the ones you intended. So be careful out there. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Well, I think algorithmically they're very similar, but the result of Amazon and Facebook's algorithms, you can see, right? I can see in some way what it's done. Oh, that ad's changed. You know, this ad means that I'm more interested in buying a new car because it's been watching what I'm doing. I can kind of get a feeling for it. Whereas the stuff that I'm calling malignant here, I mean, I think they're both malignant, but the stuff that's really malignant is the stuff that you don't know about, where decisions are made about your future and you as an individual and the judgment about you that you have no access to, right?
Well, you don't know what Amazon is doing to you.
I don't know what Amazon is quite doing, but I know what I think I know what Amazon's business model is. They want to sell me more crap, right? So when they try and sell me more crap, you know, the fact that it recommends stuff that my friends like, why not? That's probably how I do it. Kieran.
Isn't part of Google's business model to sell you? So the more complex the profile they can get of you, the more sales worthy that is. And if we reach a point in time where corporations and governments become pretty much, interchangeable, which some people say is not so dystopian, then surely at that point, that separation between the line and England is just.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think the distinction between the distinction is kind of arbitrary. It's just a convenient shorthand for this discussion. But I think Google is a very interesting case in point. That Google knows probably a lot more about me than the NSA does, just from my Google search history. It knows a lot more about me. And if you think of someone like Facebook, who are, aside from their $19 billion acquisitions, are somewhat on the back foot, as a veteran of .com 1.0, I know full well they're going to die sooner or later, and someone's going to come along in a fire sale and buy that data set. Someone will say, oh, Facebook, I remember them. Haven't they got the information on 10 billion people? Oh yeah, it's worth $500,000, and they'll buy it. And they'll do, however you think Facebook are being responsible and nice to you and helpful, the next guy who gets it's going to be a hell of a lot worse. So that, once again, it goes back to this point about redacting your data, is that once you've given it out there, it's out there. And just because the current user of your data is being nice doesn't mean the next one will be. Any more for any more? Oh, yes. I fight back by painting pictures of it and shouting about it in people at PyData conferences. But I guess have a responsibility to know where your data bleed out points are. I got very paranoid about Gmail reading all my mails, so I ran my own mail server. Now I get 10 times as much spam. It's awful. But I've got away from Google, and it feels like technologies that allow people to escape from data bleed are important. Encryption is incredibly important, but dull and hard, and so not really widely adopted. If anyone can think of a way of making encryption sexy and easy, then you'll make yourselves a lot of money. Oh, man. Yes, for my sins, I was briefly very famous in America for about a year due to appearing on a television program, which I'm not going to go into now. You can ask me later at the drinks. But part of the perks was being invited to the Playboy Mansion and being filmed. And I can say the Playboy Mansion is one of the most hateful places on earth I've ever been. They may have this beautiful grotto that you can swim under, but it's so chlorinated that it makes you feel a bit dirty about what's gone on in here and why have they put so much chlorine. So yeah, we can discuss that over a drink. Okay, thank you.
Eric.